let's just go, because it's easy to just go and mobilize and cancel and tweet. It's easy to do that, but it's hard to inform and be educated and inform people about the full scope of what's happening, why is it happening, and have dialogue around, is it gonna make sense? It's easy to get everybody riled up for one day, but can you help inform people on the ripple effects of your decisions? Hi everybody, welcome to the Do You Know Black Creators Kickback. I'm Darnell.
And I'm Melissa, and we're the creators and executive producers of the Do You Know Black game show and the Do You Know Black Kickback.
In the last episode of Do You Know Black Kickback, our contestants were asked if we hold ourselves back as a community when we pass up valuable opportunities because they conflict with our beliefs. This is in reference to the question regarding the cancellation of the show Amos and Andy due to negative reception by other Black people. So I'm gonna pass it to Alyssa. Alyssa, do you feel that we as a people hold ourselves back when we pass up valuable opportunities that may conflict with our beliefs?
Okay, I'll take a long roundabout way of getting to this answer. I think it's important to understand some of the context going into this. Just even the entire idea, I think, of this show for the Kickback and the creators Kickback came as a result specifically of this question of Amos and Andy. So, you know, for anyone who doesn't know, I am the writer and I research all of the questions for every episode. And this was one of the ones, the Amos and Andy question, one of the ones that I went back and forth a lot about, and whether or not I wanted to put it into the show. As I researched it, there was so much controversy and division that I had found when I was going into the questions and trying to figure out what was worth, you know, mentioning in the show. But it was such a big, ultimately, it was such a big part of our history, and it was such a landmark thing for the moment that despite the fact that it was created by white people, it still felt, it was such a landmark part of our culture and history, especially within that moment, that despite the fact that it was created by white people and despite the pretenses in which it might have been created under, it was still a pretty significant piece of our history that I could not just overlook. So while we didn't have enough context or the ability to add enough context within the actual episode of the game show, we created this kickback as a way to expand the conversation and to discuss the nuance around it. One of the things that I did when I actually went and was researching this question was I went back and actually watched a few of the episodes. And I had gone in with this perception of, based on what I was reading, you know, Amos and Andy, this is like such it's buffoonery, right? It's this, they must be these crazy characters of Black people. And I just went in knowing I was gonna hate the show. And I'll say, when I watched it, I actually laughed. I thought it was funny. It was to me no different than any other sitcom we would have watched today. Like the idea of watching Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, the 90s version, and Will's, you know, schemes to make money, or the jokes and kind of the stereotypes you would say he might play into as this inner city kid going to live with his rich aunt and uncle, was no different than what I saw watching Amos and Andy. So I was really surprised, and I think we can maybe chalk it up to the fact that at the time, because it was such a groundbreaking show in the sense that there really was no other cast, because there was no other network cast with an all-Black cast, maybe that's part of why it was such a big deal for the NAACP at the time. But to be honest, I felt like it was a fair representation of Black people. Whether or not it was true or not, it wasn't something that we don't go into any show watching it and feeling like it has to perfectly represent me. I can separate art and fact from fiction. So I just wanted to point that out because it leads into whether or not I felt like we lost an opportunity there. I think we did. I think we could have taken NAACP played a big role in getting the show pulled off of the air, and in light of the representation of us. But I feel like we did miss a really big moment to play a part in that success of the show. The show got canceled after a few seasons despite high ratings, and after it was canceled, the Black cast is the one who had to face the repercussions of this getting pulled off the air. Mind you, the radio show in which spawned all of this, which was spearheaded by these two white men, went on, as Lamont said, for nearly 30 years. So in the end, in the long run, we only hurt ourselves by taking that off the air when all of these actors could have been making money and expanding their brands. And the men who started this all, who we were really rebelling against, continued to profit off of us at the end.
Yeah. No, so that's great context, and I think it's very important. And obviously, as you can see, she does a lot of research behind all the stories and all the questions and all the writing, because we want to be thorough, but we also want to be interesting. So that's something that I always want to always give you props on, is the ability to research and find these interesting stories that are relevant to us that a lot of people may have forgotten. So that's one. The hard thing about, because I think initially it's easy from my perspective, being somebody that was born in 1986, sometimes you can look at it from where are we today, but before I even think about it from where are we today, try to put myself back in that time period. And my initial thing is like, you can't block, as Carl mentioned, you can't block people's blessings. One of the things that I learn these days as a man or woman or anybody, it's like, you never think with another man's pockets. So that they say you never do that. So, but putting myself in that position, something that you just said, is like, if I am an organization that's focusing on the advancement of Black people or colored people, and I see something that I perceive is detrimental to that, to the cause, in a time when everything has to be lockstep. You really, this idea of a monolith, it's like in that period, we were kind of thinking to a degree in that way towards progress. And then you kind of see this loose variable. So trying to think about it there, I guess I can understand where that comes from. But when we think about the ramifications of that long term, when we think about how does that extend moving forward, I think that that's where the difficulty becomes. So for example, one of the things that they said that I think is so important is, if you're going to take away an opportunity, then you should have a viable replacement ready to go. Right now, one of the difficulties, and I think at that time, is if you aren't building your own infrastructure, if you aren't building equal opportunities, right, like within our space, then it becomes hard because the options aren't necessarily there. And that's one of the dangers with when we're telling people or trying to dictate what we think people should do this, where it's like, okay, you're trying to tell people what they can and can't do. And if they choose to not do it, then you're not giving them another legitimate, viable replacement. So I think that that's like a big issue that we have. Another thing that they mentioned in the episode was when it comes to businesses, and we'll get more into detail with that, but they spoke about how, like this business, if you change your name to something that we don't like, just change the name. And then it's like, well, it's not that easy to just change a name, right? If you're a startup, maybe you already got artwork made, maybe you already got like your awning made, maybe you got your menus made, maybe you did all this different stuff around it, right? So it's easy for somebody or anybody that we all do it, we've all done it, I've probably done it before, that's on the outside, that wasn't with you in the gym, right? When you were practicing, when you were doing all this stuff, when you were staying up all those late nights, or if you're an actor, like practicing your lines, going gig after gig, getting rejected over and over and over again. It's easy for you to finally get this opportunity, and then you get it, and then somebody who wasn't awake with you doing all that, all those hours, to say, no, you can't do it. And then they take that opportunity away from you, not realizing like, I invested everything into this, and you just came and took it away, right? So that, I feel like that's kind of the issue that we have. And then even today, when we think about social media, we see that as well, where you have artists or people who legitimately are putting all of their effort into trying to build something or build a brand. And then all it takes is somebody 2 seconds, no effort, no research, no nothing, to just go in and put a comment that can get this person canceled. And then that person feels fulfilled. Like, yep, I expressed myself online, not realizing that your 2 seconds impacted this person's 2 years of work. So we need to be prepared with legitimate alternatives when we start to try to dictate what opportunities we're saying people can and or cannot take.
I think that to give a specific example that plays into what you're talking about in terms of providing opportunities, when we think of a few years ago when everyone was talking about boycott on Black Friday, like boycotting all of these white brands or boycotting these major brands that didn't support, you know, Black causes. And instead of just saying, because this is a continuing conversation within the community where we say, stay away from this, don't do that. But I hadn't seen a time before where we actually provided alternatives, as opposed to saying, and then expecting people to, hey, if we're telling you don't bank here, do we have a bank that people can actually bank at? And I feel like during this time, I remember specifically feeling like, wow, we can actually get behind this, not pretend like you're getting behind it. But if they're saying don't buy Starbucks, boycott Starbucks, and here are 10 Black-owned coffee shops that you can go to instead. Like, it's a simple addition. Black coffee shops existed before that, but before we weren't really giving any direction. We were just saying boycott Starbucks. Well, now you can not only boycott Starbucks if you don't want to support them, you also have these 6, you know, Black businesses, coffee shops that you can support. So I feel like it's sometimes as simple as that, just being clear and specific in what your ask is. And I think that when we think back to what was going on with the NAACP, and again, the time was a very different time. So I don't know that would have happened if this were to happen in these days, but that could have easily been a conversation where you say, how do we get ourselves into the room? You know, we don't support this show. We want you to know that, you know, we want you to know, like, we have an issue with how we're being portrayed in this show. We don't feel like this is representative of Black culture, but hey, we can point you in the direction of a bunch of Black writers. You need to staff your writers room up. And I think we have the ability, we have the, clout's the wrong word, but I think now we're in a position to be able to make those demands with Hollywood, right? Like, we have a track record as, you know, Black people in Hollywood have a track record of being able to say, like, hey, we've been very vocal about what we want in the past. You know where our issues lie. So here are the concessions that you can give us. And we've done that. We've seen that when you think about the lack of nominations for awards in the past. And what happens? It's like, you know what? We'll open up the nominating process we'll open up the Academy voters to more minorities, right? And we've made those demands, and we've had that change things systemically.
You bring up an interesting point when we talk about the idea of, first off, when we think, I remember when I first heard they were saying boycott Black Friday. So in my mind, I was thinking, well, like, why? Right? Like, so I started to think about that, because there are different reasons why, and some people may have expressed it here and there, but it was more so like hey, boycott Black Friday. And then they were actually providing alternates, right? Here are X amount of Black retailers that you can go to instead, so on and so forth. But for me, when I think about the idea of boycotting, it's usually specifically attached to, hey, there is a certain type of oppression or a certain type of transgression that has occurred in this instance, and until you fix this specific thing, we are not giving you our dollars. So in this sense, it just kind of sounded like we were using the word boycott because it was provocative, where sometimes that is necessary. But I just, when that happened, I was like, okay, that sounds good, but I feel like we're taking a little bit away from the word and the power of the idea of boycotting. In this situation, what we're talking about is, hey, if you're going to be spending your money, let's replace these retailers. Like, let's replace these things, which I think is a very different conversation than boycott Black Friday. So that's like one. The second thing that I was thinking about as a person in business is the ripple effect of this type of boycott, right? Or this type of idea. And it kind of comes back to Amos and Andy, where let's say that these retailers, and I'm sure a lot of people disagree with me here, and I don't necessarily know if I even agree with myself. I'm thinking through this process where it's saying, let's say that these retailers lose a bunch of sales, right? And because they didn't meet their holiday numbers, because usually in the holidays, they can count on a certain amount of sales for the holiday season, but now they don't get it because they missed on Black Friday, right? So let's say that happens. Who is going to be most impacted by that? It's probably going to be the hourly workers, many of them who are probably minorities anyway, right? If those people are employing minorities. So I started thinking about that. Now, I don't have all the answers because it's not an initiative that I created, but if I were going to create like that type of initiative, those are some of the questions that I would start thinking about before just jumping into something that is very big, mobilizing everybody behind something without thinking about the collateral damage. It's like those situations, and I'm not gonna bring a movie, but it's like those things where it's like you have a hero that's like, oh, they do all this stuff, and then behind them you see like a million cars flipped over, and it's like you got the bad guy, but everybody behind you is dead now. It's like you have to think about the collateral damage that you may do when you make certain decisions. Maybe they did think about that, and maybe there isn't collateral damage from something like boycott Black Friday. But if somebody were to do an initiative like that and take the time and have the ability to mobilize people behind it, then that has to be considered. A lot of time, those considerations take a lot of meticulous work and a lot of hours to do that most people aren't willing to do. They would just be, let's just go. Let's just go, because it's easy to just go and mobilize and cancel and tweet. It's easy to do that, but it's hard to inform and be educated and inform people about the full scope of what's happening, why is it happening, and have dialogue around, is it gonna make sense? It's easy to get everybody riled up for one day, but can you help inform people on the ripple effects of your decisions? So this is what I thought. I don't have an answer for any of it, but this is just these are the immediate thoughts that I had when I heard initially this idea of boycott Black Friday. I didn't know if it made sense then. I still don't know if it makes sense now. Maybe it does. But what are your thoughts on my perspective there? Because this is just where my brain went at the time.
I mean, I'm going to shift away from the idea of that and go back to the topic in terms of Amos and Andy. When you reference the idea of dialogue, I'm curious to know at the time who was a part of the conversation. This has come up in other topics that we've discussed, the idea of one group speaking on behalf of an entire community. And I remember specifically when I was researching this and I read Henry Louis Gates Jr. made a comment, and obviously for most of you who know, like, he's a very well-known, prominent scholar in the Black community, and he's very respected, well-to-do. You kind of have this thought you might consider him to be part of the elite that might have been against the show. And I remember reading him make a comment about how him and his family used to come together, similar to what Daniel said his grandfather said. He had very fond memories of the show. He's like, my whole family really enjoyed the show. For them, it was not an issue. He said that there was never any confusion, something along the lines of, there was never any confusion of whether or not these people look like were representing us. And that's paraphrasing what he said, but I think it spoke to the fact that we could watch a show like Power and for us, we do not associate that with the fact that, okay, if I watch this or if other people watch this, they're going to get this vision that we're all drug dealers or all of these other things. We're able to separate the art from, and like the entertainment from whatever they're trying to portray. And I think that's what he was trying to convey with that, where yes, the NAACP might have had very strong feelings about it, but most regular Black people, or a good portion of them from what we were reading, really did enjoy the show. And it was a way for them to separate from what was happening in the world and really be entertained by something. So we did more than just take away opportunities for these actors. We also took away the only show on air at the time with a cast that was reflective of the people, of our people. And as Lamont mentioned, and I want to press down on this because I don't know if people understand the significance of this, but after that show left the air, it took a good 30, 40 years. It took until Sanford & Son, when that came on the air in the 70s, to have another show led by a majority Black cast. That's a long time to have. Oh, that's a long gap. So now you have our community watching other shows that don't necessarily represent us. And we can look at this now in 2020, in the 2020s, and say, like, we want more representation. We want this, like, we don't have enough shows. And can you imagine there only being one show at the time? How we would have felt now, what we would have been fighting for. So I think it was really important to consider that piece of it too, which was a big component.
Well, everything you just said, I think aligns well, surprisingly, with the example that I was mentioning about the idea of Boycott Black Friday and collateral damage, right? Because what you're talking about is the ripple effect of those things, right? Like, so now you as a company, you're saying, hey, like, let's remove them. Now, maybe it was a situation where it's like, it is of the utmost importance. Nothing else matters. All that matters is, like, the biggest problem that we have is this show on air. And if we do that, that's going to be a big enough win, and nothing else after that matters, right? Like, whether it's new opportunities, whether it's taking that to pivot into other opportunities, none of that matters. Maybe that's what their perspective was. It was like, maybe they did think about it strategically and said, like, nothing else matters. That's the most important thing. But it's possible that, like, sometimes, as we see today in these situations where it's like, hey, let's just do this thing, because even if there are a lot of gaps and we haven't necessarily assessed the collateral damage of this decision here, or we haven't assessed if that's the most optimal decision to make, like, let's take this off air and then we'll figure out the rest later. That does become an issue, because now part of when you are oppressed, you have to be more strategic, not less strategic. You have to be more thoughtful, not less thoughtful. You have to be more poised, more patient, more everything. You have to be preparing to identify these perfect opportunities, because you don't have the luxury of maybe a second chance. You don't have an opportunity for a margin of error. Like, you don't have the opportunity to, hey, let's just test, make a mistake, and then retest again. Sometimes you only have resources for one test. And I'm not saying that they didn't, right? Because I don't know, and we would have to speak to people that did. But those are the thoughts that come through my mind when I think about that situation, is like, if it was a rash decision and it wasn't a well thought out decision, and you didn't weigh the pros and cons, because sometimes you only have people on your team, right? When they talk about the idea of diversity of thought. So even within the Black community, you still need to have a diversity of thought within your teams, so you can properly assess decision A versus decision B, A/B testing, right? Like, so you get to that point. But sometimes you wonder, it's like, maybe you only had a bunch of people that were into decision A, but you didn't have anybody thinking about decision B. And maybe that could have been a problem. So that's kind of an issue where and I think it's a big issue when we start tying into, like, passing up opportunities or interjecting ourselves into other people's opportunities, where we may not have been thinking about that opportunity as in depth as those people did, and we're thinking about it from our vantage point, but we may not have the knowledge or the information about what's going on so something that I always think about is if you have big opinions, then you better have big information. And a lot of times people want to have big opinions without having big information. And that's just a recipe for disaster. So I do think that that's something that that's an issue that we still see today, and even more so than before. So I wanted to get into like this really interesting question where it was something that Lamont posed, and it was a really well-placed question. And Gian, she was talking about the idea of people who are canceled coming back from being canceled and redeeming themselves and being accepted again. So that was something that she was mentioning, and Lamont pushed back and he said, give me an example of somebody that has been canceled and was able to come back from that, right? So somebody that was officially canceled and was able to come back from that. So one of the examples that they all kind of agreed wasn't the case was Carl mentioned, oh, well, Kanye. And everybody was kind of like, well, Kanye was never really canceled per se, right? So that was like one example. And pretty much everybody was essentially stumped. Nobody could think of an example. So I'll put that to you. What have you seen, and what the proper answer that I think I would be looking for, or somebody that poses this question, would be somebody that was canceled and didn't just come back, but was able to come back at 100% of what they were before cancellation. Because we've seen people get canceled and then kind of come back, which we can talk about a little bit in the impact, but I'm talking about coming back 100% to what they were before being canceled.
Chris Brown, 10 times over. Tory Lanez, but I think Chris Brown's the biggest example you could possibly name, because I think his career is bigger now than it's ever been before, even though he was huge. And I think that part of what it speaks to is, and even going back to their idea about like Kanye was never really canceled, and it's because we're very selective about who we want to fully write off, because we know what it means, right? Like we know what it means for this person to be completely cut out of our entertainment, you know, of our sphere. So I feel like the example I always think back to is Chrisette Michele, where she performed at Trump's inauguration. And I still don't think she's come back from that. Like, Black people completely wrote her off, but we've seen people like Kanye who have literally supported and met with Trump, and we can't cut him off. And I feel like it's because we're choosing who is and who is not valuable to us. Who are we willing to cut out of our lives versus like, all right, this is a really tough thing for me to do. And I think this is where the destruction comes and where the issues lie when it comes to cancel culture. Because if you're gonna do it, be consistent, stand behind it. You can't be selective over who you're gonna cancel and who you're not gonna cancel, because it doesn't just, it impacts our culture, it impacts their careers, their livelihood. And if we're not going to stand on that ground consistently for everybody, then don't waste your time doing this for this one person. Like, because at that point we're hypocrites. We've done nothing. We've proved nothing other than we can take money out of this person's pocket. But at the end of the day, what did we solve by canceling her? What did we actually solve? What lesson did we teach? Because Kanye's still running around doing the same things, and he's been effectively cancelable to an extent. And I feel like we, at the end of the day, like we really need to evaluate as a Black community whether this culture of canceling people is more detrimental than helpful to our community. I have not seen the benefits of it.
Yeah, I haven't seen the benefits of it either, especially given the context of a lot of cancellation. And one of the drawbacks, and this is obviously related to Amos and Andy, where it's one of the things that they said, just to clarify, it's not necessarily that none of them got any work anymore after losing that opportunity. It was there were some people within the cast that never got a chance to work, and many of them, that was the biggest thing that they ever did. Needless to say, that it was a huge opportunity. Essentially, at your peak, you're getting kind of your legs cut out from under you. So that was really the situation there. And in essence, after they were canceled, they never got back to 100%, right? Like that's kind of the thing. So it's easy for somebody to say, oh yeah, well, they came back, but it's like, yeah, but I came back, but one, like that journey, that road to getting back was tough, and that journey only got me back to 70% or 60%. I'm still like 40% less than what I was before. So I think that's one. I think the other big issue that we have is the fact that it goes back to my thing with big opinions require big information, and it's extremely easy to, I think that it's okay for social commentary. I think that social commentary can be valuable to brands, to elevating brands, to building brands. But when we start to talk about things that could have a negative impact on people's careers, then as spectators, it's our responsibility to ensure that we have all of the information possible before making a decision. Because there are so many times when we've seen people jump onto Twitter or jump onto Instagram and jump into the comments, and they're saying a bunch of wild stuff, and then more information comes out. And then when more information comes out, now they're like, oh, my bad. But it's like a jury when they say, strike that from the record. Everybody knows that you can't strike it from the record if it was already heard. Like, that can't happen. So it's so important to make sure that before you speak on something, before you speak in a way that has a definitive opinion on it. So you can speak on anything, but before you take an intentional side, you need to make sure that you're well informed, because you're dealing with people's lives. You're dealing with people's livelihoods. You're dealing with the ability for them to make money for themselves, for them to make money for their families. You're dealing with their mental health. You're dealing with all of these things and all it takes you is your thumbs and 10 seconds with no information. So I think that that's like a really important thing to think about, is how hard it is, or how almost impossible it is to come back to 100% after being canceled. Gian mentioned a point, and we won't get, and there's a reason why it was uncomfortable, the conversation, where they were saying, hey, the people that I've canceled are people that we know deserve to be canceled. So within our community, we know that there are some people that I think we would qualify them as canceled all the way. But even some of those people that are canceled all the way, we turned our head to a lot of things that we as a culture knew to be true for a long time, because of what you said, the inconsistency, right, that we have in our spirits. So that's my thought in terms of that.
I want to take this back now to where we started with this conversation, and I think that'll be a great place to wrap this. The question is, do we, as the Black community, do we hold ourselves back when we pass up valuable opportunities due to the fact that we think that they might portray certain negative aspects of our community or things of that nature? And I think that that's a loaded question, but I feel like there's always, as we've seen in some of the examples we talked about, opportunity for redemption. There's always an opportunity for conversation. So I do think that we hold ourselves back when we completely cut something out without context or without opening up dialogue. So I feel like that's a good way that I would end it on, in terms of how I think we need to solve this.
Yeah, great point, and way to bring it back too, because when we first started, you gave all of like the history, which was very important, and then we started talking about like the context instead of the actual question. So thanks for bringing it back. and this plays into something that Carl said when Carl was talking about the idea of doing something that's against his belief system and how he would never do that. And I guess my answer is almost like a non-answer, in the sense that we have to figure out how to create more opportunities for ourselves and our people, so we're not put in a position to have to make those decisions and have to make those choices. And I think that that's what's so frustrating about this, is that we're all working separately, we're all trying, we're all pushing, we're all doing the work, but we're doing it separately, and we've never been able to like come together and scale it so that we collectively have sustainable opportunities where we can walk away from that stereotypical role, or we can walk away from that opportunity that may be outside of our belief system, because it's not saying, hey, I have to take that because I got to put food on the table. So it's a lot of pressure coming back to us, but unfortunately, until we create an ecosystem amongst ourselves where we can remove ourselves from needing those opportunities, then we're always going to be in a really tough situation. And it's ending this episode on a non-answer, but I guess it's also ending it on an action statement, which is, this is what we need to do so we don't have to even put ourselves in the situation to have to make that choice.
I think that's a great place to wrap this up. So again, let us know what you guys think in the comments. We always look forward to seeing what you think. I'm Alyssa.
And I'm Darnell.
And this is the Do You Know Black Creators Kickback.